Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. So, this episode is about one of those strange little musical collisions that almost feels like a dare. You know, the kind artists from completely different corners of music somehow end up in the same room or at least in the same studio file, and the result is either a disaster or something weirdly great. And this one is firmly in the second category, at least in my opinion. Obviously, I can't say that you're going to love it or anything like that. I don't know you, I don't know your musical tastes, but I personally really enjoy this song. I think it's an interesting collaboration, and the song is titled Dead End Streets from the 2006 album Cocked and Loaded by the industrial rock side project Revolting Cocks, or Revco as some people call them. And if you've never heard of Revolting Cocks before, that's okay. The name alone tells you this was never meant to be a conventional band. The project originally formed in the late 1980s when Ministry's Al Jorgensen teamed up with Belgian musician Luc van Acker. It started as a chaotic offshoot from the industrial scene, full of sarcasm, heavy programming, and a lot of attitude. It's a strange musical side project. But I've always kind of liked at least some of the stuff that they put out. I can't say I love every single Revco song, but they're a little bit out there, and it's usually in kind of a good way. By the time Cocked and Loaded came out in 2006, the project evolved into something more like a revolving studio experiment. Jorgensen basically treated the band like a musical playground, bringing in whoever he felt like collaborating with. And that's where things get interesting, because Dead End Streets features one of the strangest lineups you'll find on a single rock track. Because on vocals, you have Jello Biafra, the unmistakable voice behind the hardcore punk band Dead Kennedys. His voice has always been polarizing. It's nasal, it's theatrical, and delivered with this sneering intensity that really defined American hardcore punk in the early 1980s. There's a reason he's considered one of the most memorable and iconic punk rock vocalists, and it's because his voice just oozes the sensibilities of punk rock, the attitude, all that kind of stuff. And even people who love punk sometimes admit his voice takes getting used to. But on this track, it actually works perfectly in my opinion, and instead of straight punk, Biafra delivers something closer to a ranting industrial anthem. The tone is chaotic and sarcastic, and his delivery fits the mood like a glove. Now add the guitar players. This is where the song starts to feel like someone spun a roulette wheel of rock musicians. One of the guitarists on the track is Rick Nielsen, best known for his work with Cheap Trick. That's right, you've got classic 70s rock, and Nielsen's style is sharp, clever, and a little playful. If you know Cheap Trick's classic hits like Surrender or I Want You to Want Me, you know the kind of punchy power pop energy that he brings. And then there's the other guitarist. That would be Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top. Yes, Billy Gibbons is on this track. The bearded blues rock legend whose guitar tone practically defines Texas boogie rock. Most people wouldn't expect him to be on a Revco track, but actually, interestingly enough, Al Jorgensen has known him for apparently many years, and they're at least kind of close pals or something like that. And he doesn't just show up for a quick cameo, really. Gibbons actually plays the first slide guitar lead on the track, injecting a gritty blues rock feel into a song that's otherwise built on some pounding industrial rhythms. So think about that lineup for a second. You've got an industrial metal producer known for abrasive electronics, a hardcore punk icon famous for satirical political lyrics, a power pop guitar wizard from arena rock, and a blues rock legend with a slide guitar. Well, Rick Nielsen also plays slide guitar in the track as well. And on paper, none of that should fit together, but somehow it does. I really do like this track, and it's surprising that more people haven't talked about it over the years. I just think it's cool. The backbone of the track is the classic industrial rock element. You've got heavy drum programming, distorted bass textures, and the sort of mechanical groove that Al Jorgensen helped pioneer back in Ministry's late 80s and early 90s era. And over that foundation, the guitars cut through in some unexpected ways. Nielsen's playing adds a jagged, almost mischievous edge, and Gibbons brings in some greasy slide guitar lines that sound like they wandered in from a dusty southern blues bar or something like that. And the results feel like southern rock smashing into a wall of industrial distortion. And then there's Biafra on top of it all, delivering his trademark theatrical sneer. It's chaotic, it's a little ridiculous, and it's incredibly fun, at least for me. And the album Cocked and Loaded itself was the first Revolting Cox release in more than a decade. It came through Jorgensen's own 13th Planet label and featured a long list of guest appearances. Artists drift in and out of these sessions the way people wander through a party. Members of Cheap Trick show up. Gibby Haynes from the Butthole Surfers appears on at least one track. I don't remember how many he is in, but there's at least one with him on it. And there are some other underground musicians who pop in across the record. So, as far as the album goes overall, it's it's one of those things that could also be polarizing. I don't know if the album is as great as this particular song. I've listened to some of the tracks, but Dead End Streets seems to me like it's probably the best one on the album. So Revolting Cox wasn't really a band in the traditional sense anymore by the time this album came out. It was more like a chaotic musical collective, an experiment, and Dead End Streets captures that spirit perfectly. It throws punk attitude, industrial production, and classic rock guitar heroics into the same track without worrying too much about genre boundaries. And some people would say that it sounds like you put all those things into a blender, but to me it sounds more organized than that. It's not, it's got a chaotic vibe in a way, but it definitely sounds like, some intelligence went into it. It was pretty well thought out and well produced, and somehow it still has that raw element to it, though it doesn't sound overproduced to me. And that's part of what makes side projects so fascinating. Is you've got to wonder how they're going to produce it, what kind of songs are going to emerge from these collaborations, and all of that kind of stuff. And when artists step outside of their main bands, they stop following the rules that might normally define their sound. Suddenly you get these weird crossovers that would never happen in the normal music industry lanes. And sometimes, those experiments fall flat. But other times you get something like this, a strange little supergroup moment hiding inside a single track that most people never notice. Again, you don't really hear many people talking about this song or this album, really. You've got industrial metal, some hardcore punk vibes, blues rock, and a little bit of a power pop element, too. And it's all crammed into one song, and against all odds, it actually works. So if you've never heard Dead End Streets, it's worth a listen just to hear how bizarre the combination really is. And the most bizarre thing is that it's a good song, at least I think so. And that's because sometimes the most interesting collaborations in music history aren't the big headline supergroups. They're the weird little studio accidents where completely different worlds collide. And I guess the fact that people don't talk about some of these moments that much, it might make them seem more special. It's like a deep cut kind of track, and it's something that's more individualized for that reason. Like a lot of people, you hear about these classic supergroups, and they're things that most people have heard of, but occasionally it's fun to dive into something that's a little bit more under the radar. And I would say this was one of those moments. So let me know what you think about this track, the individual musicians involved, and, what you think of the album. And what is your favorite supergroup moment? Is it something that's relatively obscure, or is it a supergroup thing that a lot of people have heard of? All right, that's about it for the episode, and have a nice day.